There is a cuisine sitting quietly at the edge of the world's culinary conversation, rich with centuries of history, bursting with flavors that range from the deeply sour to the savory and sweet, yet somehow still missing from the global spotlight it so rightfully deserves. Filipino food is one of the most complex, layered, and historically fascinating culinary traditions on the planet, and yet it remains one of the most underrated. While Japanese ramen, Thai curry, and Vietnamese pho have captured international imaginations, Filipino cuisine continues to be overlooked, misunderstood, or reduced to a handful of dishes that barely scratch the surface of what this archipelago has to offer. The Philippines is made up of over 7,000 islands, and each one carries its own food culture, its own ingredients, its own techniques passed down through generations. To understand Filipino food is to understand the country itself, a place shaped by trade winds, colonial histories, indigenous ingenuity, and a deep, unshakable love for communal eating. The story of Filipino cuisine is not just about what ends up on the plate. It is about the hands that prepared it, the civilizations that influenced it, and the resilience of a people who turned every outside influence into something entirely their own. Long before Spanish galleons arrived on Philippine shores in the 16th century, the islands were already home to thriving communities with sophisticated food cultures. The indigenous peoples of the archipelago, including the Tagalog, Visayan, Ilocano, Kapampangan, and dozens of other groups, had developed cooking traditions rooted in the natural abundance around them. Rice was the cornerstone of every meal, cultivated in terraced fields that are now recognized as UNESCO World Heritage Sites in the Cordillera Mountains of northern Luzon. These rice terraces, carved into the mountains over 2,000 years ago by the Ifugao people, are not just an agricultural marvel, they are a testament to how deeply food was woven into the spiritual and cultural fabric of early Filipino life. Alongside rice, early Filipinos relied on fish, shellfish, wild game, tropical fruits, and root vegetables. Vinegar, made from coconut, sugarcane, or palm, was already a central ingredient long before any foreign power set foot on the islands. This love of sourness, of using acid to preserve and flavor food, is one of the most distinctly Filipino characteristics in cooking, and it predates every colonial influence. The technique of cooking meat or fish in vinegar and aromatics, which would later become the dish the world knows as adobo, was already practiced in various forms across the islands. Fermentation was another ancient skill. Bagoong, a fermented shrimp or fish paste, and patis, a fish sauce made from fermented anchovies, were staples that provided deep umami flavor to everyday cooking. These ingredients were not born from foreign influence. They were homegrown solutions to the challenge of preserving food in a tropical climate, and they remain irreplaceable in Filipino kitchens to this day. Centuries before Spanish colonization, Chinese traders had already established a significant presence in the Philippines. The relationship between Filipino and Chinese food cultures is one of the oldest and most deeply embedded culinary connections in Southeast Asia. Chinese merchants, known as sangli, brought with them ingredients and techniques that would permanently alter the Filipino palate. Noodles, tofu, soy sauce, and the technique of stir-frying all arrived through this exchange. The result was a seamless blending that produced dishes so thoroughly Filipino today that most people forget their Chinese origins. Pancit, the beloved noodle dish that appears at nearly every Filipino celebration, traces its roots directly to Chinese cooking. The word pancit itself comes from the Hokkien phrase meaning something conveniently cooked. Over centuries, Filipinos transformed this Chinese noodle tradition into dozens of regional variations. Pancit Malabon, thick rice noodles drenched in a rich seafood sauce, comes from the fishing town of Malabon, north of Manila. Pancit Lomi from Batangas features thick egg noodles in a hearty, starchy broth. Pancit Palabok layers thin rice noodles under a golden shrimp sauce topped with crushed chicharron, hard-boiled eggs, and green onions. Each version tells a slightly different story of the region it comes from, yet all share that ancient Chinese thread. Lumpia, the Filipino spring roll, is another direct descendant of Chinese cooking, but where Chinese spring rolls tend toward simplicity, Filipino lumpia evolved into multiple forms, from the fresh and vegetable-filled lumpiang sariwa to the crispy meat-filled lumpiang Shanghai that has become a fixture at every Filipino party table. When Ferdinand Magellan arrived in the Philippines in 1521, and Spain began its 333 years of colonial rule, the Filipino table was transformed in ways that are still visible today. The Spanish brought with them ingredients from the Americas through the Manila galleon trade, one of history's most significant commercial routes connecting Manila to Acapulco in Mexico. Through this trade, tomatoes, potatoes, corn, cacao, chili peppers, and pineapple arrived in the Philippines and were gradually absorbed into local cooking. The influence of Spanish cuisine on Filipino food is profound but often misunderstood. Unlike in Latin America, where Spanish culinary traditions largely replaced indigenous ones, in the Philippines the two cultures merged more subtly. Filipinos adopted Spanish ingredients and techniques but filtered them through their own flavor preferences and existing cooking methods. Machado, a braised beef dish, takes its name from the Spanish word for wick, referring to the strip of fat threaded through the meat before cooking. Afritada and caldereta are tomato-based stews that echo Spanish guisos, but carry distinctly Filipino character through the addition of local vegetables and the preference for a slightly sweeter, more acidic profile. Arroz caldo, a comforting rice porridge seasoned with ginger and topped with fried garlic, reflects the Spanish love of rice dishes, while incorporating Chinese and indigenous elements simultaneously. The result is a dish that belongs entirely to the Philippines, even as it carries the fingerprints of multiple civilizations. Beyond the dishes that have gained some international recognition, there exists a vast world of Filipino regional cooking that remains almost entirely unknown outside the country. Kare-kare, a slow-braised oxtail and vegetable stew cooked in a rich peanut sauce and served with fermented shrimp paste on the side, is one of the most complex and deeply satisfying dishes in all of Southeast Asian cuisine. Its origins are debated, with some historians tracing it to the Pampanga region and others suggesting influences from Indian or Malay cooking traditions. Regardless of its exact origin, kare-kare represents Filipino cooking at its most sophisticated. Pinakbet, a vegetable stew from the Ilocos region in northern Luzon, combines bitter melon, eggplant, okra, squash, and string beans with bagoong and pork in a dish that is earthy, slightly bitter, and deeply savory. It is a dish that requires no apology for its bitterness, celebrating it instead as a flavor worth seeking. Sinigang, a sour tamarind-based soup loaded with vegetables and meat or seafood, is perhaps the most emotionally resonant dish in Filipino cuisine. It is the food Filipinos crave when they are homesick, the dish that signals comfort and belonging. Yet outside the Philippines, it remains largely unknown. Dinuguan, a dark, rich stew made from pork offal and blood seasoned with vinegar and chili, is one of the most misunderstood Filipino dishes abroad. Its appearance is striking and its flavor is deeply complex, savory, slightly sour, and intensely satisfying. It is the kind of dish that demands courage from the uninitiated but rewards that courage generously. The underrepresentation of Filipino cuisine on the global stage is not a reflection of its quality. It is a reflection of history, geography, and the particular way Filipino culture tends to share itself with the world. Filipinos have long been a people who give generously without demanding recognition in return. Their food culture reflects this. It is a cuisine built for sharing, for feeding large groups, for making sure everyone at the table has enough. The concept of boodle fight, where food is laid out on banana leaves and everyone eats together with their hands, captures this spirit perfectly. It is communal, joyful, and completely without pretension. As Filipino chefs around the world begin to gain recognition, as restaurants in New York, London, and Sydney start introducing global audiences to the depth and complexity of this cuisine, something important is happening. The story of Filipino food is finally being told on its own terms, not as a curiosity or an exotic novelty, but as a serious culinary tradition with deep roots and extraordinary range. The flavors of the Philippines, sour and savory, rich and bright, fermented and fresh, are flavors that speak to something universal in the human experience of eating. They are flavors that have been shaped by thousands of years of history, by trade and colonization, by indigenous wisdom and immigrant ingenuity. They deserve to be known, celebrated, and most importantly, tasted.